Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm Simon at Savage Reads, and today I am back with my last video of 2017, and it is, I feel like I want a drum roll but I don't have one, but it is my best books of 2017. Now I know I said this is my best books in terms of categories of novel, no, it's my best books. This is going well for my last video. I know I mentioned that this was going to be like my best, next best category of books, but actually these are my favourite books, and that's no disrespect to thrillers or to poetry or short stories or anything like that, but the novel is where my heart is. However, it's not my full top 10 because some of the Costa debut books are in my top 10 onwards, and I didn't want to give anything away because the Costa category winners are announced on Tuesday the 2nd of January, so only a few days away, but I just didn't want to give anything away or anything like that. So I'm going to go through all the 8 novels that have, and it was actually quite interesting because when I was looking through there were quite a lot of novels that I could have included that were very, very, very good, but these ones are ones where I feel like I really, really, really would put them into the hands of, well, all of you if I physically could. So, first up, which is a book that I've only read very, very recently, so I've almost felt like I couldn't put it in, but I thought, this is my channel, my rules, I don't care. And so I am. And that is Beasts of Extraordinary Circumstances by Beasts of Extraordinary... I'm overexcited. It's the end of the year. I've done too much talking. I've done a video every day in December, and it's just got to me. So I need to calm down. So, last but by no means least in the list. Well, it's not even last. Shall we just try again? So, let's try again. Watch. So, first book that I'm going to talk about is a book that I read very, very recently, and that is Beasts of Extraordinary Circumstance by Ruth Emmy Lang. I only finished this just yesterday, and it just is a book that has had me so spellbound. You know how there are some books that take you ages to read because they are dragging? This took me ages to read because I didn't want it to stop. This is really the story of Welwyn, who we meet when he's an older man, when a young boy goes into his Spider-Man's lair, because it is a big old cabin filled with cobwebs, and goes in and finds that there isn't a Spider-Man at all. There's just this old man who starts to tell him his story, and then we go backwards. And it turns out that Welwyn was born many, many years ago when, in the middle of July, when it started to snow out of nowhere. He was then an orphan and was brought up by wolves, and we follow his journey then. But we don't follow it from his perspective. It's from all the people that come into his life at different points. So we meet the butcher's daughter who takes the meat to him and the wolves, who then runs away with them. Then we move, after that kind of little adventure ends, we move on to him being put into foster care, and then after that ends, etc. So it goes on and on like that, and I won't give anything away because it's a book that has lots of twists and turns. It's got a really, really nice love story running through it, which I really, really liked, and I'm not a big fan of love stories, but love stories actually link to the next book too. Yeah, but it's just wonderful. It's very escapist. It's got that wonderful magical elements. It's a proper yarn, and I could see it as being an amazing film, or like Netflix series by, I've forgotten his name because it's the end of the year and I forget everything, but the guy who did Strictly Ballroom, and Baz Luhrmann, there we go. I could see this being an amazing Baz Luhrmann film. So highly, highly, highly recommend this. I'm really, really looking forward to seeing what Ruth Emmy Lang writes next. My next book is a book that seems to have caused not caused controversy. It's been a bit of a Marmite book. People have loved it or have not, and I absolutely loved it, and that is Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. This book took me by surprise. I was ready to not like it because just by its concept I was a little bit dubious in the fact that it's about a couple who meet in a war-torn, unnamed country. They meet and they sort of fall in love. It's the first stage of romance where they're forced together because of the city being at war with itself. And then they hear about these doors which literally exit west, so they move west into every different country that you could imagine, but the kind of where they end is quite random. You can't necessarily choose where you're going to go. So it follows their love story. It follows this kind of sci-fi speculative element, which is all obviously about the migration crisis and what's going on with people who want to leave their countries and need to leave their countries. Refugee crisis, sorry. And so it's kind of about that and about the extremes of that, but also it's really interesting. There's one scene that is in the beginning of the book where somebody starts to crawl out of somebody's wardrobe, and it's a very haunting, intimidating scene, and it's basically Mohsin Hamid saying, these aren't people who are intimidating. Yes, they come in and some people are a bit suspicious about it, wrongly, because these are innocent people who need somewhere to live. And he plays some really interesting sort of not games, but he makes some very interesting points through the imagery that he uses throughout the book. But also, at the heart, it is the love story of Saeed and Nadia, and it's one of the most honest, beautiful love stories that I've ever read. So highly, highly, highly recommend that. Then we have a book that also took me by surprise, and I read it when it was on the Goldsmiths shortlist, and that is Sarah Baum's A Line Made by Walking. I hadn't read her debut, Spill, Simmer, Falter, Wither, great title, but I do really want to read it. I admit I read this because it had a fox on the cover, and I do like a book with a fox on the cover. This is about a young woman called Frankie who, having been in the city for quite a while, having had a breakup, is sort of lost, and so she goes back to her home, but then as her grandparents have died, she ends up living in their old bungalow, where she starts to sort of take on what's going on with nature and starts to think about where her place is in the world and in the natural, but also just in the world in general. And as she does so, she starts to find dead animals and take photos of them and work out, it's a way of her working out her place, thinking about death and grief and life and living, but also she starts to not cogitate, that's not the right word. She starts to contemplate art, because also she studied art, and so as you go through, she uses art as a way of checking how she feels about things, but also making sure she's in the right mental space. It's really, really interesting, but it's very much about loneliness, and actually how the world can be an incredibly lonely place when you're older, but actually can also be a very, very lonely place when you're younger. So I don't really believe in the quarter-life crisis, but this does look at a society that is talking much more openly about mental health and particularly anxiety, and this is a book all about Frankie's mental health and her state of mind and what does and doesn't make that better. It's also just a really, really interesting story, and like I said, with the pictures of the animals and the talk around art, I don't normally like books about art, but I absolutely loved this. So that's another one. And then a book that I said I wasn't going to put in my top 10, and then was like, actually no, it's completely a book that I loved, and I mentioned earlier in my 5 authors I would like to read more of, is Moonstone by Sion, or to give it its full title, Moonstone, the Boy Who Never Was. And this is about a young man called Manny, who is, well, he's basically a male prostitute in Iceland during, it's sort of the end of World War One when the Spanish flu epidemic hits Iceland. So you've got a war going on in the background that actually Iceland isn't really anything to do with, but then this Spanish flu that kind of takes over the land, and it's like, it seemed like a curse, but also arrives at the same time as cinema, and so people try and blame this new modern thing on what, this curse that's come. But it's also about what it's like to be a gay man, because he's a prostitute, but he also really, really enjoys it. So it's a very, very graphic. I gave a copy to my mum recently, and she read the first page, and she was like, oh my, oh. And yes, but I'm hoping she reads it and loves it as much as I do, because it's a little mini masterpiece. In that amount of pages, just that mere amount of pages, you get the whole life of a man, and then there's something very clever that happens at the end, which I won't give away. It's a little bit meta, but actually in a brilliant way rather than oh, that's a really annoying way. That I would recommend this very, very much indeed. And then that's it for male authors, because my final 4 are all books by female writers. And my 4th favourite book of the year is Sugar Money by Jane Harris. Jane Harris is an author that I have loved for a very long time. I thought The Observations was wonderful. I thought Gillespie and I was amazing. Gillespie and I is one of those books where, where sometimes you feel like an author is writing a book for you, even though they're not. Well, I felt that Jane was. And she wasn't, but to me, she was. Because it just totally chimed with me. That's the only way that you can put it. Sugar Money is a departure from what she's done before. As before we've had 2 female leads, here we have Emile, no we don't, we have Lucien and his brother Emile, and Lucien tells us of their time on an island where they are slaves, and they have to go to another island not far away from, I think it's Mozambique, and I keep getting this wrong every time, Grenada, sorry. They go to Grenada to smuggle back some slaves that Father Cleophas believes belong to him. So they're kind of freer slaves than the people on Grenada, but they are still slaves, and it becomes this sort of adventure with this complete sense of doom around it, and sort of, it's a treacherous journey, but it's a yarn. And what I loved with this book is that once again, Jane Harris with Bessie Buckley and with Harriet Baxter created these 2 voices. I don't know anyone who does narrators quite like Jane Harris, because they are so real and so vivid, no matter what their background, what their race, what their gender. And she proved this again with this, because Lucien's voice is just, it's bawdy, but it's innocent, it's naive, yet it's kind of overconfident and cocky, and it's just a brilliant, brilliant character study, but it's also a fascinating insight into a period of history that is horrifying, grimly fascinating, I would say is the term, of slavery, and some of it is very hard to read. Some of the things that happened to slaves are very, very difficult to read, and actually the end of the book made me weep. I won't say why, there were 2 reasons that it made me weep. But I really, 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 really recommend this. So much so, it's a book that some of it is set on a boat, and I don't like books set on boats at all, but I still loved this book. So yeah, I would really, really recommend it. If you want a gripping yarn that will take you to a dark period of history, which will make you really think, but also open your eyes to what has happened elsewhere, then this is definitely the book for you. Third up, is it third up? Not third up, but third from the top, you know what I mean, is a book that's not actually out for another couple of weeks, but I wanted to mention because I read it in, I think, it was either one sitting with just a small, like, tea break, or maybe I read most of it in one sitting, then a little bit. Anyway, it doesn't matter, you don't care, you just want to know about the book. That is 3 Things About Elsie by Joanna Cannon. I was a huge fan of The Trouble with Goats and Sheep. I told everyone to read it. I loved that book. I think I might love 3 Things About Elsie a little bit more. I'm going to hold it that way so you can see the title. This is about a woman called Florence who, as the book opens, she is lying on the floor waiting for someone to help her. Well, we're not quite sure what's happened, and as it goes on, she starts to slowly but surely tell you about her time in sheltered accommodation, where she lives very near one of her best friends, Elsie, and how they've ended up there, but also this new stranger that's appeared, who isn't, well, it's not a new stranger because he's not a stranger. Oh dear. She begins to tell of how this new member joins the sheltered accommodation, or a new person joins the sheltered accommodation, who claims he's somebody but is somebody else, and Florence knows who he is, but nobody will believe her because Florence is starting to lose her memory a little bit, and she's starting to get a bit confused, and so people just doubt everything she says, which, one, is a look at how we should listen to people in those situations more, and also becomes quite an emotional punch to the reader, because we've all been in situations where we know something's wrong, and we may know that somebody means us harm, but nobody quite believes us because it seems a little bit too dramatic, or a little bit too soap opera, or a little bit this or a little bit that. So there's this horrible feeling of, you know, she's probably right and something awful is happening, but nobody is listening to her. But also it's about how the little things that people can do that they don't think they're doing, or don't even notice they're doing, can mean huge amounts to us. But actually some of the little things that we do that we don't think mean that much can mean huge things to other people. It's just wonderful, and the characters are fantastic. It's about friendship very much, again, like Trouble with Goats and Sheep was, but it's at the total end of the spectrum, where previously it was about 2 young girls, this is about 2 elderly women, and there's some surprises along the way too, which I really, really liked. What I love about Joanna Cannon is she sort of writes thrillers, and they're not cosy, but they're just, they have that pace of a thriller, but not at any expense of the writing or the characters. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I'm talking to you and asking if it makes sense. You can't tell me. Well, you can in the comments. And then, penultimately, a book that I raved about a lot this year, and I still think is absolutely incredible, and I can't believe it was a debut, and that is Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. And this, to me, was my personal Bailey's Prize winner, because I just could not stop thinking about this book. Interestingly, it was a book I wasn't sure I was going to be that bothered about reading, because it's about a marriage and it's about a couple who couldn't have kids, and that's something that isn't really generally a kind of theme or subject that I'm that interested in. So when I got it early on, I wasn't too fussed. However, then, because I read the Bailey's long list this year, which was great fun, and there were some amazing reads in there that I wouldn't have read otherwise, which I've mentioned in previous videos, which I'll link down below, I picked it up and was just completely hooked by it. It tells of Yejide, who is a young woman. She's married, she can't have children, and so it starts off with her husband's parents being there and suggesting they bring in a second wife, which is part of what is culture for them, which the couple are actually very against. However, it then follows on from there, and I don't want to give anything away because this book is so twisty and has so many different elements, I suppose. I mean, it's got the background of 80s Nigeria, which is really interesting, but at the same time there's a lot of myths and legends woven into it. And also, a bit like I was saying about Joanna Cannon, this book is kind of really a thriller about a marriage, but not in a Gone Girl way. I loved Gone Girl very much, but this is very different. This is a book that will really pull at your heartstrings because you really feel for Eugenie, and her narration is so wonderful. There is a really interesting element sometimes where you don't know whether it's her or her husband narrating, which I know some people had a problem with, but to me, what I found fascinating about that was that actually Ebami Adebayo is basically saying men and women feel very similar about being parents. Both of them can desperately want to be parents. Both of them can desperately want their marriage to work. Both of them can want to be in a monogamous relationship, and both of them will defend their marriage, but they don't always communicate that to each other, and we don't always know exactly what everyone's thinking. But what she does in sometimes you not being sure whose head you're in, it shows you that this is a level playing field for a couple. So I love that too. But overall, again, great story, brilliantly written, fantastic characters, took me by surprise, absolutely loved it. And finally, this will be no surprise, I don't think, really. It goes very well with my chair. Number 1, Tin Man by Sarah Winman. This book just has my heart. And it's one of those books, and I was actually downstairs with my little friends Rob and Kate, saying that it's very hard for me to talk about this book without wanting to cry. Because the story of Ellis and Michael is just so beautiful. Because it's, again, I don't want to give anything away if you've not read it. It's basically about two boys who become friends when they're young, how that friendship develops, and it looks at the lines between platonic love, passionate love, and then just that love that is just love that you... How can I put it? I don't know, that love that goes beyond all boundaries, and what we do with that or what we don't do with that, and how love can change, and how we can love lots of different people on lots of different levels. And at the same time, it's also about a really dark time in LGBTQ history as well. And it's also about how people choose to deal with their sexuality or not deal with their sexuality. But it's also just a wonderful story about love and friendship. And I just want you all to go and read this, please, if you haven't already. And if you don't, you'll be in big trouble. So that is how I'm going to end this year, with my very favourite book and lots of wonderful books. I will link them all down below in the description box. Get them from your library, ask for them for your birthday, go and spend your vouchers on them. I can't recommend them enough. I have to say though, I'm worried now that I've overhyped them. I'm just going to say, I thought they were all very good. But that seems a little bit minimal, doesn't it? Especially since quite a lot of them got me right there. Is it there? Somewhere there. The lump of coal inside is somewhere there. Anyway, I'm just going to take this opportunity to wish you all a very, very, very happy new year. Thank you so much for your support and your conversations and your recommendations throughout 2017. Here's to 2018 and a fantastic year of reading. I will speak to you all very, very soon. Happy New Year. Bye.